Hey, you know what time it is?
I don't know. 10 minutes to 10?
I think it's time to...
Distraction makers.
So, huge announcement from Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah.
They launched a whole new format that looks interesting.
We were on a different corner of the TCG interwebs this week.
It bears resemblance to a Magic format, some people might know, called Canadian Highlander, where it has point totals assigned to cards, and then you have a point total. It has points assigned to cards, and then you have a point total for the number of points that you can have in your deck. We'll explain that a little more thoroughly later. But I thought, we could sit down, we can explain kind of what this new system is, and then also, what Magic might be able to learn from this if this format is successful.
Before we get too far into talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesis, if you're new to the channel, so the lens that we talk about games is usually through the lens of game design, as opposed to high-end meta details. So we're not as familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta and what's happening. We're not as familiar with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Mechanics, but we look at everything through the systems of the game itself.
So why don't we walk through what the new format is?
So there's three major things that make up the Genesis format. The first thing is that Link and Pendulum monsters are now banned. They are not allowed in this format.
As a Magic player, I don't understand what a Link summon is. I don't understand what a Pendulum summon is. So why don't we go ahead and explain it in a way that a Magic player could understand? So what is a Link summon?
I believe a Link monster has different triangles on its outer frame that is equal to its Link number. Extra deck space.
Makes perfect sense. Why'd they ban that?
I don't know.
So what's a Pendulum summon do?
So Pendulum Summon...
All right, so all you need to know is that those two things are banned. Who cares? So the more interesting thing to discuss here, I think, is the point totals. So each deck can have, apparently their default is 100 points for a deck, and then there's a list of cards that have different point totals based on sort of their power level in previous metas and trying to balance out things that have been way too powerful in the past.
And then the only other last remaining thing is that there's a new forbidden and limited list that is used for this. So it's not using the same traditional one. Forbidden list is their ban list.
Which sounds way cooler.
Oh, it's way cooler.
That's just the thing that Magic can learn, is that they should name their ban list the forbidden list.
I mean, really, Yu-Gi-Oh! At this point is pretty much all flavor for me. So not the cards. The cards, I don't understand the flavor at all. But looks and appeal,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The vibes.
The vibes.
Let's talk about the, I guess, sort of pros and cons of using a point system like this generally. And in this way, we can kind of relate it to Canadian Highlander in that this is a particularly, I think, a good system for Yu-Gi-Oh! Specifically, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Has had problems in the past with what is known as the queen problem, which means that in a deck or in a game that has customizable pieces, why would you not just choose to play all queens if you could? And there was no resistance to playing the best cards in the game. They do limit you to 3 copies of an individual card per deck. It's a 40-card deck, right?
Yes.
3 copies, 40 cards. However, they don't really have mana in the same way that Magic does. There's
they don't have color locking.
There's no color locking. They don't really have mana. They have like a 1 summon per turn, but even that gets subverted a lot, and it's a little fuzzy. But in this way, this allows them to somewhat solve the queen problem outside of the game itself. So in deck building, we are adding in an additional layer of restriction.
So a quick, easy way of explaining the queen problem, if you happen to be a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player that's watching this, is that back in the day, there's nothing stopping you from just playing 3 Gemini Elves when Gemini Elf was the best normal summon monster to play, right? In Magic, though, it would usually be locked behind some sort of a color. So if you have a highest attack, maybe only red can play highest attack creatures.
Or higher mana costs.
Right.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think the other pro is that right now this is going to build technically more deck diversity. I don't think this has ever been a huge issue with Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially recently. I'm not as familiar with the metas, but it does sound like there's a lot of different potential viable archetypes.
Currently, from the sounds of it, all those cards that were good, if they have a point allocated to them, you might not be able to play as many copies as you might want to in decks because they're worth too many points. If you only have a 100-point budget to spend, some cards have 50 points on them, some have 1 point. There's some that have 1 point, some have 30 points. There's a big spectrum that the designers can use to sort of like guide certain cards within deck building.
Now, inevitably, like any sort of a game, this is going to be optimized. There's going to become a meta, and it's going to just exist, right? Players will figure out what the most optimal decks are. But this is going to be very fresh in comparison to what Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been playing with, especially, I think, removing Link and Pendulum monsters knocks out a whole section of Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks that just aren't going to be even playable at this point. But what's going to be interesting to see is that because they can update the system, that they can continuously kind of keep the meta fresh if they like, depending on how drastically they update it.
Right, which, basically is like another pro to the system, is that it can be updated as needed. And it also means that you have a spectrum of how you can affect a card. You don't have to go from it's playable or it's banned. There's a variety of point totals you can add to cards that mean that they're less and less playable in a deck. You can go from 1 point all the way to 100 points for a card. So if you wanted to play one copy of that card, it's going to cost you all 100 points, which probably effectively means it's banned, but it's not technically banned.
The other thing I think is really, really interesting, and that I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually needed really badly, is that because this is now a new official format for Yu-Gi-Oh! That's not just blocked by like time, like GOAT or Edison formats, which is equivalent of like something like Modern. What's interesting with that is that now the designers can actually plan out cards with different format power levels in mind, meaning that if Link monsters or Pendulum monsters are put into newer sets that come out, they can effectively understand and know ahead of time that's not going to be part of this other format's meta, so we don't even need to consider what's happening in that meta when designing for these archetypes now.
That's actually really interesting because it does give you a way to balance cards in different formats, which I think would be great for Magic in terms of like, okay, well, this card in the Legacy format is worth a lot more points than it would be in... No, other way around. It's this card in Modern is worth a lot more points than it would be in Legacy or something because the power level of Legacy overall is much higher. Yeah. It's interesting. It's more complexity, but it's interesting. The other pro here is that, these are... when in comparison to, say, the bracket system for Commander, these are much more explicit rules, right? It's that you look at a point list and you can see immediately, okay, I have too many points in my deck. I have not enough points in my deck. I can add a few more things or whatever to bring myself back up in power level theoretically with other decks that are operating at my same point total, rather than being like, well, I'm at bracket 3, but I'm playing, one game changer. Do I remove that game changer or do I add in 2 more? And also like how well are the game changers balanced against each other, right? So like one game changer might be much more powerful than another, but they're both just game changers. There's no gradient to that power level. Okay, so any system has positives and negatives. So we've talked about the positives. Let's talk about some of the negatives with the system.
Right. I spent a lot of the last couple of days watching Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers, and it seems like a lot of enfranchised players are not concerned by this, but you and I seem pretty concerned by this, which is complexity. It's a very complex system, and even more so than Canadian Highlander. Canadian Highlander, I think the list is significantly smaller, and I believe it usually scales from it's 1 to 15.
I think it's 10. It's 10 points for a deck instead of 100.
There's a lot less versatility in that. And again, it's that's great for super enfranchised theory crafters, right, that want to get in there and start exploring and making decks, which is fantastic. But yeah, it's a lot to consider.
Yeah, and really, it's adding in, like we said, a whole nother layer to deck building, right? So we are solving the queen problem in a new way. When you're going to put your deck together, we're saying, hey, you can't necessarily play these 2 queens together. They can be played separately, but not together, or whatever, right? But because of that, there's an upkeep to this, right? There's this will be updated. Players will need to be on top of it. So it works well, I think, for enfranchised players, like you're saying, very competitive players. But it doesn't work as well for a more casual audience, probably, which I think is why Commander's using this bracket system instead of a point system. And
I think that this is actually especially complex for a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! Because when it comes to other TCGs on the market, if we look at the main 3 of Pokemon, Magic, and Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Magic and Pokemon kind of have this sort of collector space for them to get certain players interested. Magic also has multiple formats, right? So you can have cards that are designed with modern intentions, Commander, Standard, Limited, etc. And a pack is going to be made up of a lot of those different cards with those different use cases. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Hasn't had these other formats, and I don't think has quite as much of a collector culture. And so really the way to, I think, entice players is you have to make those cards good. Now, again, I'm not familiar with current Yu-Gi-Oh! Sets, so I don't know. There could just be a lot of what Pokemon does, which is, it's just a lot of, I guess, like, chaff that's just in the packs, that's sort of acting as fluff or flavor. But if that's not the case, then I'd imagine the selling point for most of those sets is that you have to make cards that are viable in either a brand new archetype or existing archetypes in order to sell that set, meaning there's even more cards that players have to know about and understand. Whereas if we use, Magic's newest Spider-Man set coming out, people have been talking about like the 4 cards or something that might be relevant. And it's like, yeah, you in your one format, you might only need to know these 4 cards or something, because that's all that's relevant for you to play that.
Another potential con is more on the designer side of things, where because you now have a gradient somewhere between banned and unbanned, playable and banned, I guess, you might be more risk averse when you go to like make a decision about something that needs to be addressed in a format, and instead you might creep into the point totals and say, okay, well, there's a problematic card, let's add some points to it and see if that works. Let's wait a little while, let's add some more points to it, see if that works, when the card should just be banned. Now, I think you're more likely to take action generally and do something if you're seeing a problem emerging, but I do think that there might be a delay in taking extreme action, where when that is your only option, is banned or unbanned, you're more likely to sort of eliminate the problem potentially. So you might end up with you might end up with a problematic card that continues to be a problem even though you've put points on it.
I also think to add to that a little bit, because I do think the decisiveness is just cleaner, right? I think it should be as helpful as possible to remove any unnecessary information, right? So, for instance, the card Catapult Turtle is a classic combo card from like very old meta back in the day, is 100 points. And that's essentially them saying, don't play Catapult Turtle. So, like, at that point, could you just not have it on the list and say it's banned? Right? Is that not just a simpler way in order to make sure that the list itself is a little bit cleaner?
Well, it's not technically banned, so if something else combos with it that isn't on the list yet and you figure it out, you get to be a genius for a minute before that other thing gets points put on it.
That's true. Speaking of Magical Scientist, is 95 points. So there's 5 points for you to combo off Magical Scientist.
There you go.
And then the final thing is that this is super risky of them doing this. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is all in on this. They have announced this format and also announced that it is going to be officially having official sanctioned tournaments at local game stores.
Full send on this one, which honestly I think is admirable, right? Yeah. They're basically saying, look, we've got this idea for this new thing, and we're going to give it the best shot it can to succeed.
I think the worst case scenario is you're going to get people that already play the game, that already have a lot of these cards, to just go and play this other format and try it out. Best case scenario, you increase the player base from people that maybe, fell off a little while ago, or they didn't like the idea of Lincoln Pendulum monsters, and that just got into, crept into too high of complexity for them, and they kind of want to go back to those old school metas. You have this new format available to them. That's not just the Edison or GOAT format again. So yeah, I think it's risky, but it's risky, I'd say, for a game like Magic to suddenly do this, right? Where they have all of these different formats and they come out with all these different formats all the time. But for Yu-Gi-Oh! To kind of do this for the first time and really go all in on it, I think it's probably good. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a success for them. Okay,
so let's move into takeaways. What do we think, Magic can learn from this? I think that's kind of the theme for the video here. So, one, I think there's sort of some pros and cons for, at least in the commander sphere, for CEDH to adapt this and take on some kind of a point total system. It's more likely that would need to be managed by the community, because it doesn't seem like Wizards of the Coast is all that interested in managing the CEDH format. But this could be a way to sort of solve some of this queen problem stuff for CEDH.
Each partner is 51 points.
You can only play one partner.
Yeah. They're not banned.
But you can't play them together anymore. Yeah.
Kinnon's 101 points.
So
Can't
Kinnon is banned.
It's funny because these types of systems are going to be more utilized by the players that are heavily invested, right? So it's going to be harder to be approachable. But if your concern at a certain point as a company or as you're developing a format for a game is not to get more players, but to sort of hone in on the actual format itself, and make sure that it has a healthier meta, or that you need to shake things up in some way, that like I don't think starting to figure a system out like this or use a system like this is a bad place to start.
I have another con, and this might be a con for Magic as well. This is difficult to enforce at a Friday Night Magic level. Is that like, it's pretty it's pretty tough for you to sort of like observe what your opponent is doing and then make sure that they don't have too many points in their deck. If they're just sort of playing, whatever, and you're like, I'm counting the points up as you're playing your cards, and I'm the one who's sort of like having to police the situation. Now, if it's an event where you register a deck, that's a different story. But yeah, I mean,
no, I think that's totally fair. And I do think that you do have to, you register your deck, but I think those lists are going to be a lot longer than, right, and have a lot more small differences in numbers compared to even something like Canadian Highlander.
Yeah, and the thing that got me thinking about it was I was, thinking about whether or not this would be a good fit for the standard format because of all the sort of issues that's having right now, that you would maybe think, okay, this could be cool to apply to standard to help smooth out some of these ban problems. We can act sooner on something like VV and Cauldron, where we can make sure that they can't be played in the same deck together, but they can be played in separate decks, and then see if that they're still problematic in the format. We can then see which one of them might be more problematic before we take any kind of a ban action. But then I'm like, okay, but wait, because we have sort of like, we have, hyper competitive standard at the peak, and then we have a bunch of casual standard below that, and you get sort of like less and less ability to sort of police the format with the systems outside of just the players themselves as you go down further into casual.
I suppose it depends on if Wizards would care about policing that, right? In a Friday Night Magic sense, like, yeah, that might be awkward, but in a tournament sense, right, as long as the point system isn't too robust, and I do think Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesys right now is leaning towards, in my opinion, a little too robust. But I think when you have a robust one, it's a lot harder to track, like you're saying. But if there's very few cards, or there's like easier shorthands, right? Like everything is a certain amount of points, and so you have to have a certain total for your deck or something like that, right? Like then that makes it a little bit easier for you to sort of calculate and track.
The other thing that's interesting is like this could be a lot easier to navigate in a digital environment, right? Like something like Arena.
I don't know why more digital games aren't doing this.
There's something interesting about this, though, is that in a digital setting, you can just patch the cards, right? Yeah. So like you wouldn't necessarily need to do this point total thing. I could actually see a system like this that operates in real time in a digital environment being really interesting. That as like, okay, as decks or cards are winning, the system itself points them for you, so you don't really have to touch it as like a designer.
Oh, sure.
Or as a developer.
It just naturally grows based off win percentage.
And the format fluctuates because of that. But like
that sounds like something Richard Garfield would do in a game.
Maybe.
Like, honestly. Yeah.
And players, would have to know that that's the experience that they're in for. Yeah. So like their deck as they're playing it can get too many points. They play one game, they get out of that match, and suddenly they can't play their deck anymore because the points have changed.
Yeah, that is funny. It would have to probably be some sort of a weekly reset.
It could be a weekly, almost a seasonal type.
It's funny because that's sort of like a half step to what Flesh and Blood does, right? Where Flesh and Blood is if a card is used and wins too many times in a tournament, then it gets retired.
It goes in the Hall of Fame or something.
Something
right?
like that. Yeah. So this is just that, but every week it's slightly getting stronger and stronger. Or
well,
whatever.
And then also like as things get less played, they would be reduced in points potentially.
Yeah. What the hell? Why are people doing this? Richie, get on that. You got the resources and the manpower. Or we'll cut this and then.
Does he? We'll just cut this whole idea, and this is going in our pocket.
Yeah. What the hell?
Put that in my pocket for later.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think overall system's cool. I'm excited to see what happens in the Yu-Gi-Oh sphere. Is that what it's called? Where you fight?
Are you excited to see what happens?
You fight in the sphere?
No.
Where do you fight?
You fight on motorcycles.
Is this true?
If you enjoyed listening to us talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! And want us to talk more about Yu-Gi-Oh!, please feel free to give a little like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
If you would like us to never talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Again, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.